minute. All right, I think I'll go ahead and get started. I think that some folks are connecting still, but I think we're good to go. So hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Judy Reben. I'm a clinical psychologist and associate director of JFK Partners. So on behalf of JFK, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar as part of our transition webinar series. Today's topic is transition to home during COVID-19. Parents ask the providers. So when we were putting this together, we tried to think carefully about what kind of content would be appealing to parents of young kids and also to the providers who support them, as well as what time of day would be most fitting. So here's what we came up with. We thought that an interdisciplinary panel of providers could provide a broad opportunity to try to address some of the most common challenges that you all might be experiencing during this time. And we also decided on an evening webinar, and I've not really done one of these before, so I'm happy to have everybody join us this evening. We're hoping that means you've had a chance, if you've got young kids, to put your kids to bed. Maybe you can put your feet up, maybe you can pour yourself a drink and relax and listen and ask questions. If your kids are still awake, maybe you can listen to parts of this webinar, but whatever your circumstances, we're hoping that you'll be able to take away one or two new ideas or suggestions, or at least get some confirmation that you're already doing a good job. Importantly, this is a guilt-free webinar. Please do not listen to our panelists and think about all the things you should be doing with your kids, but rather we want you to recognize that we're in the middle of a crisis. We all are, right? And that we are all trying to do the best that we can. We're recording today's event and we'll archive it on the JFK website, along with other webinars in this series. So for those of you with friends or family who you think might be interested in hearing what the panel has to say, feel free to let them know. So we're gonna have three panelists this evening. Dr. Catherine Picard, maybe Catherine will wave, so everybody knows which one's Catherine. She's our postdoctoral fellow and clinical psychologist. Terry Hall, speech language pathologist, and Melissa Argente, occupational therapist, and both Terry and Melissa are JFK faculty. And the truth is I work with all of them every day and they're fabulous. And I'm excited to be here and moderating this panel and hear what they all have to say. So here's the format. Each panelist is going to present for about 13 or 14 minutes. And if all goes well, we're going to have a good chunk of time left for questions. So what we want you to do is write your questions in the chat box. I'm going to do my best to get to them, to get as many of them as we can. If we don't get to your questions, we're going to try and post the questions and responses on our website later. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Catherine. So the order is going to be Catherine and then Terry and then Melissa. But if you have questions, you can actually start whenever you want and we'll circle back to them. All right, so Catherine, take it away.
Awesome, thanks Judy. I'm going to share my presentation here. Let's get it geared up. There we go. All right, actually, hold on. There we go. All right, so like Judy mentioned, you know, we're so thankful that you all are with us this evening, especially with everything going on. And our goal tonight is to really leave you with a couple of different strategies or tools to give a try at home with everything going on. And I'll be talking about this evening two topics. One is building social opportunity. And for this, really thinking about ways to build connection that don't necessarily involve jumping on FaceTime, reaching out to other people, but things you can be doing at home during quarantine. And then in addition to talking about social opportunity, I'll also be talking about managing behavior. The transition to quarantine, as we all know, has been challenging. There are a lot of things are different, and that can be difficult to manage. And so we'll be talking about some different strategies to really promote positive behavior. So specifically, we'll be covering three areas. So within the area of social opportunity, talking about having fun by following your child's lead, From there, we'll also be working on independent play skills. So really thinking about how to support kids in playing without you there, knowing that we're all trying to manage work and family and everything else going on right now. And then I will shift to talking about managing behavior. Oops. There we go. So like Judy mentioned, when we were putting together these slides, we thought a lot about what are all the different possible topics that we could cover in a webinar. And within social opportunities, there's a whole lot we could talk about, honestly. We could talk about how to support your child's pretend play skills. We could talk about how to teach turn taking and all different things. But in reality, sometimes even thinking about teaching all of those skills while playing can be hard and overwhelming. And so really for this, we're thinking about how also just to have fun, right? And to do that by following your child's lead within the context of play. And an important thing to know is that, even though this is not necessarily about teaching a skill per se, we are really thinking about this as a way to build your relationship with your child, build their engagement, and also to have a good understanding of how it is that they're playing and seeing the world as it is without any of that. So to do this specifically, we're thinking, not necessarily playing all day long with them, really setting aside certain times of the day that are good for you and good for your child, and they can be short blocks of time, 10 or 15 minutes. The important thing is to limit distractions. It's hard to play when there are other things that are exciting going on. And so setting up the space for success with lots of different toys and distractions, especially thinking about screen time, not easily accessible. For this, you'll start by really letting your child lead the play, really doing whatever it is that they're doing. So not necessarily feeling the pressure to lead and feeling the pressure to come up with ideas. We're just saying, let's do what they do, to join in with them and to narrate what it is that they're doing. I think as adults, we have a tendency, all of us, to ask questions. What are you doing? Are you building a tower? Are you playing with cars? And really here we're thinking about just giving language to what your child is doing and being their narrator, if you will. And to have fun, right? There's literally no pressure here. We're just talking about, again, having a good time with your child by doing what it is that they're doing. And so this is one idea to build social opportunity that, again, doesn't involve necessarily reaching out to other people, trying to organize, virtual play dates or anything like that, but really thinking about your own relationship. All right, let's talk independent play. So we all are home and doing our best to balance a lot of different things. And teaching independent play is an important thing, irrespective of coronavirus. It's important for kids to be able to play well together and to be able to play well with you, but also to be able to play well and play on their own, especially when you're trying to work too. And so when we think about teaching independent play skills, there are a few things to really keep in mind. I guess the first being, it's important to know what your child can do already without kind of any support from you. So how is it that they can play on their own? Can they play on their own for 1 minute? Can they play on their own for 10 minutes? What do they do when they play on their own? And to really have that in mind, because when we teach this skill, we want to think about kind of building your child and starting off where they're at and just gradually increasing the amount of time that they're doing these things. So specifically, to teach this skill, oftentimes it can be hard for kids to transition into independent play on their own right off the bat. And so it may be the case that you actually need to start by connecting with your child and really doing that kind of like we talked about in that earlier slide. So really starting off by following your child's lead kind of and getting them going in play. And then from there, you're thinking, okay, I gotta go hop on and check my email or hop on a work call. So at this point, we're thinking about, okay, how are we gonna get your child to play independently? And what is often helpful is to actually give concrete options for what your child can do on their own. And there are a lot of different options for this. I think the thing to keep in mind is that you may need to show your child what it is that you're asking them to do. So not all kids are able to play independently, and so it might be that you're pulling out a puzzle for them and you're at least getting them started. You're showing them what it is that you're asking them to do. We're picking activities that are good for independent play, so things like puzzles, things like coloring, things like building with Legos, activities that can really be done in an independent way. And importantly, activities that have a clear end. So you can say to your child, you're going to color, and when you're done with this page, that is when you can come see me and we can do whatever it is. So really making sure that there's some sort of visual cue or something there to kind of signal how long it is that they will be playing on their own. Again, to start small and build. So really thinking about what is your child able to do already. If they're able to play for 1 minute on their own, they're probably not going to be able to play for 20 minutes on their own. And so really kind of thinking about activities that will just move them so that they're playing on their own for a little bit longer, and kind of building from there. And then finally, rewarding any independent play that they are able to do by being very specific. Wow, you did that on your own. So really being specific about the praise that you're giving to really show that you're proud of them for doing that specific independent play. And I guess I want to comment here that probably many people on this call have more than one child. And so the same principles apply. It may be the case that you're setting your 2 kids up in the same way, telling them exactly what it is that they're looking to do, and showing them how to play together. So that the strategies here to teach one child to play independently are the same for teaching more than one child. So I want to transition to managing behavior. So I guess the thing to know before I jump into this is obviously the transition to quarantine has been challenging for a lot of people, and for a lot of reasons, right? And it's been especially challenging for kids. There has been obviously a major change in routine, right? So life looks a lot different now that we're in quarantine, and there's also a lot of loss that has come by being in quarantine. Loss of going to the playground, loss of playing with friends, loss of you name it. And so this does make behavior a little bit more difficult in quarantine, or a lot more difficult. So some behaviors that we might see increase because of everything going on. These are just some of the basics, and a few that you might see. So the first is whining, having tantrums when things don't go kids' way, protesting when being asked to come inside after spending an awesome time outside, escaping or running away when you tell your child to brush their teeth or to clean up their toys, when you give them a direction, or melting down when you're saying, okay, it's time to put away the phone, or it's time to turn off the TV. And so these are things that we might be seeing more of, and just want to highlight those. So I want to talk about some general strategies to support positive behavior. In this kind of brief presentation, we'll be able to talk through, the ABCs of behavior and strategies to manage, every single situation. But I really think of these as general strategies for lots of different behavior, and strategies to set kids up for success. And so the first one here is to set yourself up for success. And I think of this in a few different ways. The first is that if there is an object, for example, that is a frequent trigger for challenging behaviors, to really control access of that trigger. So for example, if a phone consistently causes meltdowns, to really be thinking about how to kind of, control access to that. If waiting is hard for your child, and that is a trigger for behavior, and waiting at the dinner table is hard, you ask them to take a seat and they run away, to really make sure that when they get to the table, there's something there to occupy them. And so that wait time is not necessarily a trigger. And so again, we're thinking about setting yourself up for success by really avoiding certain triggers. With that in mind, you can't necessarily avoid every single possible trigger for whiny behavior and meltdowns and other challenging behavior. And so other strategies that we think about that aren't necessarily about avoiding a trigger so much, are following, and this is probably like, if you had to take anything away from this presentation, it's following harder activities with those that are easier and fun. It is really hard for kids to transition from something exciting to something that is like not preferred. And that's true for all kids. And so to the best that you can, for activities like brushing your teeth or cleaning up that are not fun, to follow them with something exciting, or something a little bit better. So first you're going to brush your teeth and then we'll read a story together. First you're going to clean up, then we're going to go outside and play. So really thinking about kind of having those hard activities come first. You can also make things that are not as fun more fun, to the best that you can, by incorporating different interests that your child might have. So for example, if you're asking them to clean up their toys, it could be singing a preferred song while you're cleaning up, and you're gonna clean up during that specific song, right? So it's not fun to put away toys, but there's something there to kind of build engagement and a clear time frame by which your child is going to be cleaning up. I think the other thing to keep in mind, again, the goal of this webinar is not to make you feel like you need to be teaching different skills and working on things all the time. But I do think an important thing to keep in mind whenever we see tough behavior or harder behavior is, does your child need to be taught or kind of reminded to use a more positive behavior? So I think we can go back to cleaning up. So when you ask your child to clean up and they start to whine, right? Why might they be whining? Are they whining because they need help? Are they whining because maybe they didn't understand? Are they, thinking about why is it that we're seeing kind of more whining? And if you think they're whining because maybe they need help or it's hard or they don't want to do it, to really, model what it is that you would like them to do instead of whining. And so maybe it is that you're modeling for them, can you help me, or help. So again, we're obviously trying to set kids up for success by, structuring situations in a certain way. But I do think it's important to be thinking about why the behavior is there and whether we need to teach something else. And then lastly, and most importantly, is obviously to reward any positive behavior that you are seeing, right? And to be paying attention for that. I think that obviously rewards do not need to be like candy or even like sticker charts. Praise, high fives are just as good as long as they're specific. So kind of circling back to when we were talking about independent play, we're really thinking about, that was so awesome when you cleaned up your toys. Thanks so much. So really kind of being specific about what it is that you're saying. And so that obviously is a lot of information, and behavior is pretty complicated. Teaching social skills and building in social opportunity is also complex. And so we do have a link that you'll see in these slides, and it's actually on the JFK website, to additional resources that are really geared towards families in light of coronavirus. And so these include things like there are actually modules on how to kind of support positive behavior in a more formal way. There's different social kind of activities that are listed there, and so there's a lot more resources here. And so I am going to end my slideshow here. And do I need to stop sharing my screen? I do. Hold on. Stop share. And I'm going to pass it off to Terry, who is going to talk about language specifically within coronavirus.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let me try to do that. Here we go. All right, we're ready to go. Tonight I'm going to be talking about communication considerations and challenging behaviors. So Catherine set it up beautifully for me. We're in such unusual times right now. It's not that challenging behaviors and communication is a new topic. What is new is exactly the times that we're in the times of quarantine. And so it has changed our way of delivering services as well as how parents receive services. So it's on both sides that has been a challenge for all of us. And as you can see here, and it's even down to sharing things and how we're presenting information to the community. So I think that it's really important for all of you. I'm so happy that all of you are here. We've got a variety of professionals as well as parents. And so I'm very pleased to see that. So let's think about what is a parent to do when those challenging behaviors are coming on, and I want to really look at it from a communication standpoint. So just really looking at this illustration, it really does show you that the challenging behavior is like an iceberg. It's like a child's behavior is not always what it seems. In fact, behavior is communication. Everything that a child does, good or bad, is communicating something. But what we see is the behavior. So that's the uppermost tip of the iceberg that we see above the surface, but there's so many pieces that we do not see below the surface. So I want you all to really think carefully about, what is this behavior trying to communicate to me? And it's hard to do that when you're tired or you've had to break up fights. Also try to find time to work and try to find time for yourself. So it's very challenging for all of us. So what we don't see, what's under the surface, may be socially, it's driving a behavior. Basic needs, even like I'm hungry, I want that cracker, I can't get it, I'm going to fall on the floor. So then we'll see that behavior, but not understand that it's meeting that basic needs of hunger, or they're tired. So there's so many reasons why a child can show us what we see on the surface as behavior. Okay, so let's look carefully at challenging behaviors. So like Catherine said, even though you can plan, you could use any proactive strategy that you've learned tonight or in other areas from your therapists, from teachers, your child may and probably typically does still engage in challenging behaviors. So we really want to think of answering the following for us. And so we want to ask ourselves, why are challenging behaviors occurring? What's the underlying purpose? What's below the water that we can't see? And then we want to see, how do we break the cycle between my child's challenging behavior and the rewards that maintain that behavior? So that's a really important thing to think about. Okay. So oftentimes it's really understanding the link between challenging behaviors and language learning. So challenging behaviors are a way for your child to communicate to you. But we also need to realize that those limited communication abilities interfere with language learning. So it becomes this vicious cycle. So that limited communication leads to those challenging behaviors, meltdowns, hitting, screaming, yelling, kicking, pinching. And then those behaviors interfere with language learning. So you have this vicious cycle that you keep going around and around. And so what we really want to think about is, how do we break that cycle? You know, when we look at the limited communication abilities that we have in our children, especially those with ASD, we know that functional language use is really challenging for those children. And functional language use meaning like making requests, being able to be all done with something, or to regulate an activity like, I like this, I want more of it, or to end it, I want to be all done. So those are the functional language use examples that I have for you. There's so many others, but those are big ones for our early language learners. And also on top of that, to add more complication to the issue of limited communication abilities, our children with ASD have limited social skills. So that adds yet another layer on top of that child's difficulty communicating effectively, and being able to understand that his parents, his caretaker, his siblings do not understand what he knows. So that's some of the limited social skills that cause challenge as well. So our big question is, how do we break this cycle and develop more acceptable skills? Because it is this cycle. Limited communication leads to challenging behaviors. The challenging behaviors interfere with language learning. And then so you go around and around. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at your child's challenging behaviors and why they're occurring. So I want you all to get the wheels turning right now and think about, what is my child's most challenging behavior? Hold that in your mind right now and think of what that is. So what we should think about is unlearning that challenging behavior. We want to unlearn it. And you think, okay, that's easier said than done, for sure. And it's not always successful, it's not always easy, but you will find that children are more likely to engage in behaviors that have worked in the past. So they will think, okay, if I kick and scream, that will get me the toy in the store. I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna do it so I could get that toy in the store because it's worked for me in the past. So if you break that cycle between that challenging behavior and the rewards they're receiving, that's going to break the cycle. Is it going to be easy? No, it's not going to be easy. But is it necessary? Yes, it is necessary for further learning of language skills. So really, in order to break that cycle, I'm just going to simplify it. Very simple, to think about 3 different things. So from a communication standpoint, I want you to think about, what is the function of that behavior? Do I want to get that toy in the store? Do I want to be all done with work? Do I want to not do online school anymore? Do I not want to see the screen for that purpose? Do I want to hit my sister because she's in my space? Or kick my brother because he knocked over my line of toys that I so carefully made? So what we also want to do is, secondly, is to stop reinforcing the challenging behavior, because back to that whole idea, children are likely to engage in behaviors that have worked in the past. And remember, behavior is communication. So that's why it is so essential for us to try to figure out, what is he trying to tell me? What is he trying to say? And then to teach an appropriate replacement behavior. That is a really important piece, and sometimes a piece that is overlooked or forgotten. It's very similar to, like, if I were to try to talk somebody out of smoking, for example. They're so driven to smoke because it gives them so much satisfaction. It helps them relax. It's an oral sort of, you know, input that they find that they really need. There's also the physical piece that goes along with that. But if you tell them to stop smoking, that's not enough. You know, what else could I do instead? You know, so I'm going to go back to that behavior that I do know because it's worked in the past and I don't have anything else. So that's very much like thinking of what it would be like for a young child. I don't know any other way to tell you I want that toy or I want that cracker and you're not giving it to me. So I will, you know, act out and I'll show you negative behavior. So let's look a little bit more at the function of that challenging behavior. So if I were to boil it down to two very, very huge categories, and I tell my parents this all the time when we're talking behavior and experiencing it in the moment. Children have meltdowns or show challenging behavior because of one of two things. They either want access to something, they really want something, or they want to escape from something. So I know it's really boiling it down to very simplistic terms, but think in your minds again. Think back to that challenging behavior that I told you to draw out of your experience. Probably just happened today. I could think of something. So if you picked it, think, okay, was it because my child wanted access to something? Or was it because they wanted to escape or be done with something? So let's think carefully about that. So access, when a child wants access to something, it's important to not give in. And I know this is really hard to do. And especially in times like this when you're just so worn down and, okay, you've seen this face for so many hours and they're not taking a nap and they're not eating, they're not doing what they need to do. And it's yet another power struggle and fight. So it's hard not to give in, but it's important, so important to be consistent. And so I will model and prompt an appropriate communication. Like, for example, if a child wants a cookie off the shelf, well, they've already had 5, so they can't have any more. So what's important is that you're not going to give in. You're going to find something, you know, maybe they can't have that, but they can have this other thing. Or if they haven't had a cookie, then they will need to show you something. They could point, they could ask for cookie, or if they had one already, they could ask for more. And so you're going to model the appropriate communication for them. For those children who are verbal, you're going to model, oh, more cookie, or depending on their language level, I want the chocolate chip cookie. Or a child who's nonverbal, it may be pointing. So that's really important to be able to think of breaking that cycle and then modeling a replacement behavior. Okay, so the second reason a child could have a meltdown or challenging behavior is to escape. So they want to be done with something. You have offered them a puzzle and they're like throwing it across the room. So be really careful about how you manage that behavior. Be careful to follow through. You do want to follow through and then model and prompt the appropriate communication. Oh, we're all done. And then you can move on to the next activity. Sometimes your activity may be cut short. When you see, oh, it looks like you want to be done, let's do one more. And then so they do one more and then they finish the activity. So what you are reinforcing and rewarding is that communication, all done, even if you have to hand over hand help them sign it, okay? So I always tell parents this because it's really frustrating managing behavior and teaching new communication strategies and signing and language. I tell them, it's going to get worse before it gets better, but don't worry. it will get better. So hang in there. You know, you really need to stay on track. So when behaviors don't work, you're going to see that your child will have a tendency to try more intense behaviors, even up the ante when they do not get things immediately, or they don't get what they want, or something turns out in an unexpected way. They're going to try to scream even louder, to kick even harder, to hit even more, to just throw more toys. So that's going to happen. But, you know, think about those intense behaviors. They are hard to sustain. You may very well be ones that are telling them that, you know, it's really hard for them to keep screaming, keep hitting. And we do know that these kids can maintain their behaviors for several hours. But, you know, a lot of people will say, well, let's purposely ignore the unwanted behavior, which will work for certain behaviors if that is what they're after, if they really are seeking attention. But purposeful ignoring is not enough alone. You really want to prompt and model appropriate behavior. Even if it is for getting attention, you'd want them to be able to tap somebody and say, Mom, Mom, or Dad, Dad. So purposeful ignoring alone isn't enough. You could turn away, but you want to also pair it with something that a replacement behavior. So think always in your head, well, what do I want them to do instead? This has always really helped me, okay? So really thinking about, you know, where we're going. This has really become uncharted territory for both therapists, service providers, and parents. I think what makes it so challenging is that we are living in a time that is very uncertain. And so you're really thinking, well, how do I manage this behavior? I've spent so much time with this child and I don't even have time for myself. And we all know that that is very essential for all of us to have time for ourselves. So I encourage you to really set your expectations in a realistic manner, because I find myself, even as a therapist, I'm telling my parents, you know, let's think a big picture here. How important is it for us to have this beautiful, well-balanced breakfast, you know, free of carbs and sugar, when your child only wants to get up and eat sugary, high-carb cereal, but it makes them happy? So let's think about that. So they are eating. Could we do something else to get them to eat maybe what you would like them to eat? So realistic expectations are really important. They've always been important, but even more so now, I think. It's important to stick to regular wake-up times and bedtimes. I really find that my sessions, when I have Mr. Hyde as, you know, instead of, you know, oh no, it's Dr. Jekyll instead of Mr. Hyde, then I think, okay, what is the difference here? You know, what are the contributing factors? I also tell my parents to split your day up in blocks. You know, just work around regular meal times. And Melissa's going to go over this in more detail, but I just want to make sure that you all know, and we all thrive in schedules, but don't go overboard with the schedules. You're not going to be able to follow a picture schedule exactly. It's just hard, and it might at the end of the day feel a little deflating. So think of what you can do realistically and split up your day that way. Include fun time, just like Catherine was saying, but also quiet time. Your child needs to actually be able to spend time away from you. So those independent activities that Catherine was talking about, so important. But stay flexible, okay? So I think that the last thing that I want to leave with you all is to remember that you all are essential, and I'm so glad that you're here with us tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who will talk more about her area. So let me end this.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Argenti. I'm an occupational therapist on the JFK team. And Terry just passed it over to me. And I think she just ended on a really great note that I can start transitioning to some of the stuff I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. And the topic I want to highlight today is staying on routine in quarantine. And Terry was already talking about, same time bedtimes and wake times and things like that. And so if I had to think about some of the priorities from an OT perspective for children, I would think about some of the highlights right now, the priorities, right? There's things I have to do every day, such as dressing and eating and sleeping and communicating and playing. But if I had to pick 3 topics, I wanted to dive deeper into sensory and how to really nail a sensory diet to kind of obtain regulation, feeding, and sleep. So those are 3 of the basic needs that all children need to achieve every day. All right, so many of you may have heard the term sensory diet, but for those of you that haven't, a sensory diet are all the different activities that children and adults do every single day to kind of help maintain this optimal zone of regulation and achievement. And for a lot of kids that have sensory processing issues, it's even more critical that they experience lots of different sensory activities to kind of keep them in the zone of regulation, as we would call it. And so I would say I'm going to list out a bunch of really big ideas and then drill down into some smaller fun ideas too. Then hopefully some of these tips and tricks that you can take away from. So one of the big key highlights for achieving a sensory diet is outside time daily. And for those of us living in sunny Colorado, I mean, we're very fortunate right now, if we're going to be in quarantine, that the sun is shining often and we can be outside and the warm weather is approaching. And it's a wonderful time to get outside right now. So I would say that's actually an understated idea, that it should really be, if you can, try to get outside at least once or twice a day. And then even though the playgrounds are closed and lots of things are closed, there's still lots of fun things you can probably do around the community if you're feeling comfortable. And that's essentially like a walk outside. You can make a scavenger hunt. You can make a schedule where the kids have to find a squirrel and a tree. And if you're not comfortable leaving your property, you can even make it a scavenger hunt where they have to watch things come by, depending on your community where you live. Even there's a rainy day. Rainy days can be super fun, and kids can be like Peppa the Pig and stomp in puddles. Kids can collect rocks and then bring them back inside to paint them. Again, lots of outside time is really beneficial for kids that are experiencing sensory processing issues, and it can really help them stay in the zone of regulation. Additionally, the idea of linear movements where kids have to move back and forth can be incredibly calming for many kids. So I put a picture of a kid in a wagon. Wagon rides right now are super fun. Kids are contained. You can kind of keep them safe and not touching anything. Stroller rides, of course. Bike ridings are wonderful. Even hiking backpacks or any type of ride-on equipment that a parent can do can be really fun for a lot of kiddos. And you can also get a lot of proprioceptive input too as they're bouncing around too. So even though you may not be going to the trailhead with kids, if you have access to a hiking backpack, maybe encourage a family member to put that on and take a kid for a walk around the neighborhood, or even inside or in your yard if you can. Another big area that can be pretty powerful is the oral processing. And that's oral motor input. So lots of different oral motor input can help kids also stay regulated. So you want to kind of think about giving these opportunities throughout the day. And so you might want to think about some kind of crunchy snacks, lots of bubbly drinks, like a low calorie or low sugar seltzer drink is really fun for a lot of kids. A lot of kids tend to like that bubble in their mouth, and that can give them that input and kind of keep them calm. Additionally, lots of bold dips, such as like a garlic hummus or a tzatziki sauce. Think about, spicing up a snack time with a bit of flavor for some kids. Fruit leathers and chewies are also really powerful. Dried mango is great, or beef jerky. Those are some activities that kids can do that kind of kind of keep them calm. You may also want to think about giving that type of oral motor input when they're doing something sedentary to kind of really engage them. So maybe you need to do a work email or make a phone call. Maybe think about giving them some beef jerky while they watch a TV show, or giving them some crunchy snacks while they're doing a coloring activity as well. The next item is big body activities. I like to call big body activities. Another word is sometimes heavy work, if some of you have heard that too. Big body activities essentially is getting all that energy out and really having them work their muscles and getting their joints engaged so that they're staying regulated. So some fun ideas right now, if you have the access to it, is getting them involved in the garden, having them drag a heavy garden hose across or carry a heavy watering can. They could push a kiddo in a wagon if you have a bunch of kids, or even save in a cardboard box and have them push or drag a cardboard box around outside as well. If you have access to stairs, a child in the family can do some animal walks or bear crawls up and down the stairs in between some routines. Again, just to kind of get their body moving and get that energy out. There's lots of ways that you can kind of hit that movement in order to kind of keep them regulated. Additionally, sensory play is for all ages and abilities. And I think some people think of sensory play as just for babies and little toddlers, but a lot of 5, 6, and 7-year-olds really love to kind of get dirty and messy and really get creative with sensory play. So I would just really encourage people to really kind of open up this idea a little bit more and get creative and allowing sensory play for all different ages. Additionally, you can really encourage a sensory play to be outside as well and kind of utilize outside time and sensory play, which is also really helpful if it's a messy play thing. Then it's a bit of an easier cleanup. You can put an old blanket down or a tarp and put a big box or bin out and just kind of let kids get creative, hide some toys. And that also might give you or the parent some extra time to kind of catch up on some self-care or some work responsibilities too. Another thing I want to highlight is beware of auditory. A lot of children may not like the noise, especially since it may be noisier than typical in your house with work phone calls or emails or visitors or something like that. So be careful of the auditory. A lot of kids may not like background noise. And so you just may want to think about, hey, is it noisier than it typically is right now? And how can I make it a bit quieter? On the flip side, some kids really crave auditory and noise too. So if you're feeling that your kiddo's kind of sluggish and might need a bit of an energy booster, consider putting on some music. Utilize Google or Alexa to kind of put on some fun songs. They have some really creative kid songs right now and activities that that are listed in my PowerPoint. I'd be happy to share the JFK website too. Some of them are called animal workouts, where they kind of, a musician engages your child to act out like an animal. There's a really fun one called Run Baby Run. There's another one called Slippery Fish. There's we're going on a bear hunt. So lots of kind of guided music lessons that are auditory only that can kind of help engage your child, give them the auditory needs, and now they have them have some fun too. Another principle is using big sensory activities before a seated activity. This can also be incredibly helpful for a working parent or a parent that just kind of needs a break. So again, maybe going outside or doing that dance party or a really big activity before you know the child has to go and sit down for a mealtime, or before you need them to have some quiet time before you have a work call, or if you need to have them do a homework lesson or a worksheet. You really want to get their bodies moving and going before they sit down and really have to focus. So that's a key principle too for the sensory system and their sensory diet. Finally, create a cozy space. So a lot of kids in preschool and even in the early elementary years, they have a cozy area available in their classrooms. And so since kids don't have access to this right now with schools closed, consider making a predictable and cozy space for your child so that if they're feeling overstimulated or they're feeling like they might need a break, they know there's a quiet space that they can go to and it's always there. All right, let's talk about feeding and mealtime. So feeding and mealtime happens every day, a couple of times a day, and all kids have a variety of different interests and abilities at mealtime. So many of these suggestions may not work for some kids and some may work for other kids. But I hope to give you just a couple of nuggets that, that you'll be able to utilize soon. So one of the big things is stay on routine. As much as you can, try to have consistent meal times and snack times, because essentially you really want the child to come to the table really hungry, and you want them to have a natural hunger cue. So if they're snacking all day, they may not be hungry when you go to serve them a more nutritious mealtime. So if you can really stick to routine, you'll see a lot of success with having the child eat a lot of the preferred foods that you would like them to. Also, since we're all home right now, there's a silver lining that we're getting our kids more involved than ever, and all kids of different ages and abilities can participate in mealtime. An older kid with higher skills may be able to set the table, while a younger kid may be able to just maybe get the napkins out of the cabinet. And some kids like to mix and stir, other kids like to chop. If you can even give your child some sort of item to chop or something, that they might love that too. Consider using a timer at mealtime. This is a strategy that often helps a lot of kids that need support sitting down in a seat and staying seated, or it could also help a really slow eater too. A timer takes the onus off the parents or caregivers and really uses the third party to kind of manage the mealtime. There's timers on apps and phones and Google and Alexa as well. If you could find, another bullet item is always offer up a preferred food. So if you could take away one little feeding therapy hint is, if your child's a very selective eater, picky, serve up a preferred food during every meal, right? It takes the pressure off you, it takes the pressure off the kid, and you know that the kiddo always has their favorite food or something that they will definitely eat on that plate, and then continue to expose to new foods. But if your child always loves this one food, give them that food, but then also mix it with other sides with that food too. For a motivating idea, you can consider using a post-meal time video call with a family or friends. So you can really use that as a motivator to keep the kids seated during a mealtime. And then you could have them ask them to call a favorite family friend on the video during the end of the meal. Again, you want to do it during the end of the meal. So during the meal, they're really engaged with the food and the social, and they're not relying on the video for the mealtime. For those kids that are underweight, just a reminder, since they may not be having typical appointments, inpatient or with your nutritionist, don't weigh them daily. It's really stressful. Try to just pick one day a week that you will weigh them and kind of stick to that. So only do like a weekly weigh-in and use the same scale if you can. And for those that don't have access to a scale, call a provider. Many providers in the community are starting to give families scales, or at least loan them out, so that families can start to weigh their children. Finally, take a break if you need to. If you have the support and feeding is a really big stressor for you, ask for a little help and say, you know what, I can't do dinner tonight. I just need one night off of dinner, and then you'll cycle back in tomorrow. So just don't forget that if you have the ability to ask for help and there's someone there that can do it, take a break. It's a lot. Finally, the last topic is sleep. We all need our kids to sleep. We all need to sleep too. So a couple reminders to kind of support a healthy sleep routine is really highlight the activity during the day. Stay outside if you can. For toddlers that are still napping, make sure it's not too long of a nap. You're going to want to kind of cut it off and make sure they can get to bed on time. Continue to stay on routine. Make sure brush your teeth, pajamas, etc. Limit screen time about 1 hour before bedtime. Avoid alerting activities. Some kids don't like a bath before bed, so try to get to know your kid, and maybe a wrestling match before bed isn't the best thing for them. Consider some sensory interventions if you can, a weighted blanket, soft music, a deep massage. Evaluate the bedroom environment. Think about the temperature. Think about if you have blackout curtains. It's really bright in the morning now too. Aim to start the day around the same time. It could be tempting right now as we're off schedule to let your kiddo sleep in. You're going to really want to think about having the kiddo wake up at the same time every day so you can stick to the routine. And then finally, consider an okay to wake light. So there could be a special night light that goes off with a certain color. that lets your child knows that it's time to wake up. So I know we're running out of time. So with that being said, I kind of wanted to end on this note that encompasses all of our talks. And I thought this quote was really fitting for our audience and our daily life right now. And it says, even the smallest actions are steps in the right direction. So I hope that hearing all these ideas and suggestions tonight, just one little nugget or one little information is a step in the right direction. We don't want you to feel overwhelmed with all this. It's impossible to do it all. But we hope that you take away one little thing and just knowing that, you're making progress every day.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa and Terry and Catherine. We have just a few minutes for a couple of questions. We certainly have learned a lot about play and communication and behavior and sensory diets and some mealtime and sleep routines. We do have a question in the chat that I'll just read out loud, and it's specifically for Melissa, but others can weigh in, and it's around, can you give some suggestions for transitional activities between a big sensory activity and a seated activity? Sometimes it seems like kids can get revved and then have a hard time settling back down into a more regulated state. So the in-between.
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So the in-between, so that's exactly right. Some kids get too amped up. So some kids get too amped up with spinning or jumping. So you want to keep that in mind. So try to avoid the spinning and jumping before a seated activity. One of the most calming big activities are the linear movements. So going for a walk, going for a bike ride, or going in a swing tend to be actually the most alerting and calming activity before a seated activity.
Great. Anybody want to add anything to that?
I think I would also add to think about what activities your child naturally kind of calm your child, and to build some of those in potentially before taking a seat. If they're really revved up, you can also think about modeling taking deep breaths, depending on how old your child is, to help their body naturally, kind of start to calm down.
Okay, great, thanks. I had a question as I was listening to everyone talk, and feel free to type some in the chat. I think we do have time for a couple of more questions before we wrap up. The question that I had as I was listening to everybody, I know certainly this is something I experienced when my kids were little, and I know lots of people experience, which is, what suggestions do you have for families who are really struggling to try to juggle it all? Whether it's working or not working, or just being part of your family, doing caretaking of maybe parents, older parents, but also feeling a little guilty about that you're not doing enough for your kids. Like, this is a conundrum. So I'm curious about what each of the panelists might say about that.
I think it really is a conundrum. And I guess I would be thinking about, every family has things that they are naturally doing well. I think a lot of this talk was around what are some things that you can try to, move your child forward, to make progress. But I also would be taking the time to reflect on the activities that go well during the day, whether that's movie night or the times that you go for a walk, and to be doing more of those, and reflecting on the things that are going okay, and really continuing to do those things. Again, kind of without that pressure of feeling like you need to do everything.
Yeah, I actually just had this conversation with one of my families recently, and there's so many stressors the families are experiencing now, being furloughed from their jobs, trying to balance therapies and so forth. So part of my role, I find, for a lot of the families is to allow them permission to not do everything. Like, for example, one of my families, I said, how about if we go every other week? You're starting ABA, it's a lot of screen time, it's tough. So use your resources if you can. Talk to people for support and get some input there. And sometimes I'll just say to my parents, if you need permission, I'm giving you permission.
Yeah, I think that's great, Terry. And to go along with that, I would say that also give your permission to just kind of embrace what your family is, and that your family is unique. And there's no other family out there that's like yours. And if you can, don't play the compare game with anyone else. It's really difficult. And I've never thought more about this than recently, that in these times, everyone's family is so different, and we're all impacted with finances and resources right now. The resources that you used to have may not be available. Your friends and family who you relied on may not be available. Everyone has a different income and childcare situation. And so really just embrace that your family is unique, and that the way you are going to charter this is going to be individual and special, and it's really going to look like no one else's.
I think that's really great, Melissa, and I'll just tag along to that. And that is that, you know, we hear a lot in the media about all the things that we should be doing and can be doing. And you hear a lot of buzzwords, and certainly there's the buzzwords of self-care. And I guess what I would add to this sort of self-care piece is self-compassion. That I think there's a lot of, we might be compassionate towards our partners or our kids or other family members who might be in a different sort of circumstance, but we have to be able to look at ourselves and say, you know, I'm doing okay today. Like, it may not have been perfect, but I kind of did all right. And even if I didn't do all right, maybe tomorrow will be better, you know, that sort of thing, as opposed to trying to discount our own efforts. So those are some things we want you to be thinking about. Let's see, we have another question, and maybe this would be our last question. It's, what's been the best feedback the panelists have received from parents? Fewer sessions, shorter sessions, coaching parents versus direct therapy. So does that make sense to you guys? Can you see it in the chat? It's, you know, like how to be thinking about how you want to do things differently given what's going on right now.
Sure. And I can kind of jump in, and I work with a lot of younger kiddos, so 2 and 3-year-olds. And some of the feedback I've received from parents is they're right now, because time is so limited, they're really enjoying when having all the therapists meet together during one visit and having a really robust 1-hour visit with multiple therapists. And it's been a really unique opportunity because it's kind of ideal for a therapist, because we can all collaborate and think of ideas and approach a problem from different angles. And that has been really one of the most common feedbacks of success that I've been getting from my parents. They love having an hour with their entire team where they can talk, vent, and we all brainstorm solutions and give a ton of coaching in that hour. Great.
Others, Terry or Catherine?
I think for my families that I treat right now, it's the flexibility. I think that's what's important, so that parents don't feel like, oh, I'm failing if we can't make it to the end of the session. So every day is different, and we're not ever sure what child we're going to see that day, just like the parents are. So the parents really appreciate the flexibility of, like, we're going to do this, let's let him go on a break, and then we're going to talk for a little bit. So that's how we're going to use this time. Let's bring him back, and then we're going to do one more and then say goodbye. So I think that's important for them to know too.
Great.
I think I agree with that, Terry. And I think the one thing that I'll add is I work with families of kids kind of across the lifespan, really, and the feedback that I've gotten and what I've been thinking about most is really like, what are the priorities in our session? You know, kids aren't able to hang with us, and Zoom fatigue is real. So in the time that we do have, how can I get kids engaged and also be thinking about what it is that is going to be more helpful? So really, to really be thinking about priorities in any given session.
And to know that what somebody says they might want one session, they might absolutely change their mind the next time, and that's totally fine.
Totally.
We're all just kind of thinking we know what we want, and that might change tomorrow. So I think this might be a good time to kind of end it for the evening. It's a little past 9. We want to thank everybody for your time, your attention. Hopefully your kids are in bed and everything's calm at your house. So, and look forward to this recording. It will be on the JFK website. So we will sign off, and we'll let some of our JFK people sign us off.